Today we're focusing on two of the poorest countries in the world, Burundi and South Sudan. Combined, their GDP is smaller than that of Haiti. Yes, you heard that right. Most of their citizens survive on less than $2 a day. How did these countries end up in such dire straits? And is there any hope for a brighter future? Let's find out. First, let's rewind a bit and take a look at the past, their colonial history. Both Burundi and South Sudan were once controlled by European powers. Burundi was ruled by not one, but two different countries. First, it was the Germans who took control in 1890, but after World War I, Germany lost its colonies, and Burundi was handed over to Belgium. After World War II, the desire for freedom grew stronger in Burundi, and eventually independence was achieved on July 1st, 1962. Meanwhile, South Sudan's history is intertwined with that of Sudan, which was under joint British and Egyptian rule from 1899 to 1956. The British, much like in other parts of Africa, focused on taking resources from the land, often neglecting the needs of the local people. This neglect created problems that would last for generations, and when Sudan gained independence in 1956, these problems only got worse. The South, home to many black Africans and Christians, felt left behind by the Arab-dominated government in the north. After a long and arduous struggle, South Sudan finally achieved independence in 2011, becoming the world's youngest nation. Despite achieving independence, the path to prosperity has been incredibly tough for both Burundi and South Sudan. Their economies have been held back by political turmoil, social unrest, and a lack of basic infrastructure. Burundi, a small landlocked nation with an area of 10,747 square miles, slightly larger than Maryland, is home to over 13 million people. Yet its entire economic output, the total value of all the goods and services produced in the country, is only around $3.4 billion, according to the World Bank. That means the average income per person is less than $300 per year, barely enough to cover basic necessities like food and shelter. Agriculture accounts for about 33% of GDP and employs roughly 80% of the workforce, mainly growing coffee, tea, and food crops like banana and cassava. But with limited access to modern farming techniques and equipment, and frequent droughts and floods, it's a constant struggle to produce enough food. In South Sudan, the situation is even more dire. Despite being a much larger country, approximately 248,777 square miles, roughly the size of Texas, its economy is even smaller than Burundi's, with a GDP of just $4.9 billion. With a population of over 11 million people, this translates to an average income of less than $450 per year. Like Burundi, agriculture is the main source of livelihood for most South Sudanese. Agriculture accounts for about 15% of GDP. Pre-conflict, it was higher, and employs over 90% of the workforce. Main crops are sorghum, maize, cassava, and groundnuts. Cattle is also a significant source of livelihood and wealth for many communities. This over-reliance on agriculture and oil leaves South Sudan extremely vulnerable to global price fluctuations and devastating impacts of climate change. In both countries, industry is underdeveloped, accounting for less than 20% of GDP in Burundi and less than 5% in South Sudan. This means there are few other job opportunities outside of farming, further trapping people in poverty. To put this into perspective, the average person in the United States earns over 80 times more than someone in South Sudan. What's worse, both countries rely heavily on foreign goods to meet their basic needs, from food and medicine to fuel and machinery. This makes them vulnerable to global price shocks and exchange rate fluctuations, putting even more pressure on their already fragile economies. But it's not just goods they rely on. They depend heavily on foreign aid, with millions of dollars flowing in from international donors each year. This aid is essential for keeping basic services like healthcare and education running, but it also creates a dangerous cycle of dependence. In Burundi, foreign aid makes up about 16% of the national income, while in South Sudan, that figure is a staggering 40%. This means their economies are propped up by money from other countries, making it difficult to build self-sufficiency and truly break free from poverty. It's not just about income though. The quality of life in both countries is severely impacted by poverty. Electricity is unreliable, clean water is scarce, and healthcare is often out of reach. A staggering 82% of people in South Sudan live in extreme poverty, while in Burundi 65% of the population lives below the national poverty line. But the roots of this poverty run deeper than just low incomes. Both countries possess valuable natural resources, yet they've been unable to harness this wealth for the benefit of their people. Let's explore why. South Sudan, for instance, sits on the third largest oil reserves in sub-Saharan Africa. This oil discovery fueled hopes of prosperity, but instead it has become a classic example of the resource curse. This phenomenon occurs when a country rich in resources fails to translate that wealth into broader development. Instead, it often leads to corruption, conflict, and economic instability. In South Sudan's case, oil accounts for a staggering 19% of government revenue. This over-reliance has left the economy incredibly vulnerable to global oil price fluctuations. Additionally, the civil war that erupted in 2013 decimated the oil industry, causing production to plummet from 350,000 barrels per day in 2011 to less than 150,000 barrels per day today. This drastic decline has had a devastating impact on the economy and further entrenched poverty. Burundi, on the other hand, possesses rich reserves of minerals like nickel, gold, and rare earth elements. However, a lack of infrastructure, investment, and technological expertise has prevented the country from fully exploiting these resources. The mining sector remains underdeveloped, contributing only a small fraction to the overall economy. Both countries share a common obstacle to economic progress: weak governance, corruption, and political instability. Burundi ranks 160th out of 180 countries on Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, while South Sudan ranks 178th, indicating a severe lack of transparency and accountability. This corruption diverts resources away from essential services and infrastructure, perpetuating poverty and inequality. So, is there hope for Burundi and South Sudan? Absolutely. Take Botswana, for example. At independence in 1966, Botswana was one of the world's poorest countries, with a GDP per capita of just $70. Like Burundi and South Sudan today, it was a landlocked nation in southern Africa, covering an area of roughly 224,711 square miles, about the size of France. It was home to a small population of around 540,000 people, heavily reliant on subsistence agriculture, primarily livestock rearing, and with virtually no industry. But Botswana didn't stay stuck. Through sound economic policies, prudent management of its diamond resources, and a commitment to good governance, it transformed itself. By the early 2000s, Botswana's GDP per capita had soared to over $3,300, lifting millions of people out of poverty and establishing the country as an upper-middle income nation. It diversified its economy beyond diamonds, investing in sectors like tourism, manufacturing, and financial services. This not only reduced its vulnerability to commodity price fluctuations, but also created new opportunities for employment and income generation. Today, Botswana boasts a GDP per capita of over $7,700, higher than South Africa, in significant improvement from its early days. The population has grown to roughly 2.4 million. Agriculture, while still important for livelihoods, contributes less than 2% to GDP. Meanwhile, the industrial sector has grown significantly, with mining, primarily diamonds, and manufacturing now accounting for over 40% of GDP. What can Burundi and South Sudan learn from Botswana's success? It shows that even the poorest countries can make incredible progress. With strong leadership, smart decisions, and a focus on building a diverse and resilient economy, a brighter future is within reach. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.